The moment Trent Garrison's hand wrapped around Kia Walker's collar and yanked her backward, the entire cafeteria went dead silent. 300 students, mid-bite, mid-laugh, mid-conversation, all froze like someone had hit pause on reality. But Kia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. What happened next would change everything at Windsor High School forever. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. It started 3 weeks earlier, the day Kia transferred in. She was the only black girl in her grade at this suburban school, and she knew exactly what that meant. She'd done this dance before. New school, new stairs, new whispers, new tests of whether she belonged. Her mother had warned her that morning as she dropped her off. "Baby, just keep your head down for a while. Let them get used to you." But Kia Walker had never been good at keeping her head down. She walked into first period English wearing her favorite purple hoodie, natural hair in 2 puff balls, gold hoops catching the fluorescent lights. The teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, smiled warmly and introduced her to the class. "We have a new student joining us from Austin. Everyone, please welcome Kia Walker." The response was exactly what she expected. Some curious looks, some indifferent shrugs, and from the back corner, a snort of derision. That snort came from Trent Garrison, 6'2" of entitled attitude wrapped in a Letterman jacket. Star quarterback, mayor's son. He sat sprawled in his chair like he owned the place, which in many ways he did. His great-grandfather had founded half the businesses in town. His family name was on the library, the park, even the football field. And Trent made sure everyone knew it. "Look what we got here," Trent muttered to his friend Miles, loud enough for half the class to hear. "Diversity hire for the school brochure." Miles snickered. Dean, sitting behind them, joined in. Mrs. Reynolds shot them a warning look, but said nothing. Teachers rarely said anything to Trent Garrison. Kia took the only empty seat, 3 rows ahead of Trent. She could feel his eyes on the back of her head. She could sense the hostility radiating from that corner of the room. She'd felt it before, in other schools, other classrooms. The difference was, this time she was tired of it. This time she wasn't going to smile and pretend she didn't hear. This time she was ready. The first real incident happened during chemistry lab. Kia was paired with a quiet girl named Daisy, who seemed relieved to have a partner who actually wanted to do the work. They were measuring chemicals when Trent and his crew walked by their station. Trent's shoulder bumped Kia's arm, hard. The beaker in her hand tipped, spilling acid across the lab manual. "Oops," Trent said, not even trying to sound sincere. "Maybe you should go back to wherever you came from if you can't handle basic equipment." The teacher, Mr. Parker, was helping another group and didn't see what happened. But Daisy saw. Half the class saw. Nobody said anything. Kia looked up at Trent, her dark eyes steady. "You should watch where you're going. Might hurt yourself being that clumsy." Trent's face reddened. "Excuse me? You heard me," Kia said, turning back to her experiment. "Or do you need me to speak slower?" The room got quiet. Nobody talked to Trent Garrison like that. Nobody. Miles and Dean exchanged looks, waiting for Trent's response. But the bell rang, saving everyone from whatever was about to happen. Trent leaned in close as students packed up. "You just made a big mistake, new girl." Kia didn't flinch. "I don't make mistakes. I make choices." Over the next 2 weeks, Trent's campaign began. It started small. Her locker was filled with crumpled paper. Her backpack disappeared during gym and was found in the boys' bathroom. Anonymous notes appeared on her desk with messages like, "Go back to the ghetto. You don't belong here." But Kia kept every single note, took pictures of every incident, documented everything in a small notebook she carried everywhere. Her mother noticed the tension at dinner one night. "How's the new school, baby?" Kia pushed peas around her plate. "It's fine, Mama." Her mother, a nurse who worked double shifts to afford their apartment in this better school district, wasn't fooled. "Kia Renee Walker, I didn't raise you to lie to me. What's happening?" Kia wanted to tell her everything, but she knew what would happen. Her mother would go to the school, make a fuss, and things would get worse. They always got worse when parents got involved. So she forced a smile. "Just typical new kid stuff. I'm handling it." But handling it was getting harder. Trent had followers, and they made sure Kia felt their presence everywhere. In the hallways, they'd form walls she had to push through. In class, they'd whisper just loud enough for her to hear their comments about her hair, her clothes. "Hey, Skin." During lunch, no table seemed to have room when she approached with her tray. The breaking point was building, and everyone could feel it. Even teachers who pretended not to notice the harassment could sense the electricity in the air whenever Kia and Trent were in the same room. It was like watching storm clouds gather, dark and heavy, waiting for lightning to strike. Daisy was the only student who showed Kia any kindness. She was a small Vietnamese girl who knew what it felt like to be different in Windsor. During lunch one day, she warned Kia in a low voice. "Trent's planning something. I heard Miles talking about teaching you a lesson. You should tell someone." Kia appreciated the warning but shook her head. "Let him try. I'm not running from Trent Garrison or anyone else." Daisy looked worried. "He's dangerous when he's angry. His dad owns half the town. The school won't do anything to him. Then I guess I'll have to do something myself," Kia said, taking a bite of her sandwich like they were discussing the weather. What Daisy didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Kia Walker wasn't just any transfer student from Austin. She was the daughter of Mark Walker, a former Marine who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan before becoming a mixed martial arts instructor. Every morning before school, Kia trained with her father. Every evening after homework, she practiced Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and Krav Maga. She didn't advertise it, didn't brag about it. It was just part of who she was, like breathing. Her father had taught her more than just fighting techniques. He'd taught her discipline, strategy, and most importantly, when to use her skills and when to walk away. "Violence is always the last option, baby girl," he'd tell her during their training sessions. "But when someone puts their hands on you, when walking away isn't possible, you end it quick and decisive. No playing around, no showing off. You neutralize the threat and get safe." The Monday of the 3rd week started like any other. Kia walked into school wearing ripped jeans and a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. Her hair was in braids this time, twisted up in a bun. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers, but she kept walking, head high, shoulders back, the way her father had taught her to carry herself. During morning break, she went to her locker to get her history textbook. When she opened it, a cascade of printed photos fell out. Pictures of lynchings from history textbooks with her face photoshopped onto the victims. Her hands shook, not with fear, but with rage. This was beyond harassment. This was a hate crime. She gathered every photo, every sick image, and walked straight to the principal's office. Dr. Collins, a middle-aged white woman who always seemed overwhelmed, looked uncomfortable as Kia spread the evidence across her desk. "This is serious," Dr. Collins said, her voice careful. "Do you know who did this?" Kia met her eyes. "We both know who's behind this. Are you going to do something about it? Or do I need to handle this myself?" Dr. Collins shifted in her chair. "Without concrete proof linking this to a specific student, our hands are tied. I can file a report, increase hall monitoring." Kia stood up, gathering the photos. "Save your reports. I've got all the documentation I need. Miss Walker, please don't do anything rash. We have procedures, Doctor," Collins called after her. But Kia was already gone. Her mind was made up. The school wouldn't protect her. The system wouldn't help her. She'd have to protect herself. Lunchtime arrived with its usual chaos. The cafeteria was packed, every table full, voices echoing off the walls. Kia got her tray and looked for somewhere to sit. As usual, Tables mysteriously became full as she approached. She finally found a spot at the end of a half-empty table and sat down to eat in peace. She was halfway through her meal when Trent appeared. He didn't come alone. Miles and Dean flanked him, with a few other football players hovering nearby. The cafeteria noise dimmed as students noticed Trent approaching Kia's table. Phone cameras started appearing, held low but recording. "Hey, new girl," Trent said, his voice carrying across the room. "You're in my seat." Kia didn't look up from her food. "Funny, I don't see your name on it." Trent's jaw tightened. "Everything in this school has my name on it, including that seat, so move." Kia still didn't look up. She took another bite of her sandwich, chewed slowly, swallowed. "Number." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Students at nearby tables started backing away, sensing what was coming. Someone whispered, "She's crazy. Nobody says no to Trent." Trent's face went red. He stepped closer, looming over her. "I said move, now." Kia finally looked up, meeting his eyes with a calm that seemed to infuriate him even more. "And I said no. Learn to accept it." That's when Trent snapped. His hand shot out, grabbing the collar of her shirt, yanking her up from her seat. Her tray clattered to the floor, food scattering everywhere. "Listen here," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You don't belong here. You never will. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." 1. His grip tightened on her collar, lifting her slightly off her feet. The cafeteria was dead silent now. 300 students watching, waiting, some recording on their phones. This was the moment Kia had been preparing for, not just for 3 weeks, but for years. Every morning training session, every evening practice, every lesson her father had drilled into her muscle memory. It all came down to this. Time seemed to slow down. Trent's hand on her collar, his sneering face, the circle of his friends ready to jump in if needed. She could see it all with perfect clarity. More importantly, she could see every opening, every vulnerability, every mistake Trent was making. He was too close, too emotional, too off balance from leaning forward. His weight was on his front foot, his other hand down at his side. His friends were too far away to help. Immediately, Kia's hand came up fast, faster than anyone expected. She grabbed Trent's wrist, the one holding her collar, and twisted it sharply clockwise. At the same time, she stepped to the side and brought her knee up hard into his stomach. Trent's grip loosened as the air whooshed out of him. Before he could recover, Kia continued the wrist lock, forcing him to bend forward, then swept his legs with her foot. Trent Garrison, star quarterback, mayor's son, king of Windsor High, hit the cafeteria floor hard. The sound echoed through the silent room like thunder. But Kia wasn't done. As Trent tried to get up, she maintained control of his wrist, planted her foot on his chest, and applied just enough pressure to keep him down without causing serious injury. "Stay down," she said, her voice calm and clear. "It's over." Trent's face was purple with rage and humiliation. His friends started to move forward, but Kia's eyes snapped to them. "Anyone else want to put their hands on me?" Miles and Dean froze. The other football players looked uncertain. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Trent was supposed to be untouchable. "That's assault!" Trent gasped from the floor. "You attacked me! Everyone saw!" Kia smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Everyone saw you grab me first. I defended myself." Big difference. She released his wrist and stepped back, hands at her sides, non-threatening. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the spell broke. Students started talking all at once, a roar of voices and excitement. Phones that had been recording were being checked. Videos already being shared. Someone started clapping, then another, then dozens of students were applauding. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to show that Trent's reign of fear might be cracking. Security arrived within minutes. 2 officers who looked confused by the scene. Trent was still on the floor holding his wrist, while Kia stood calmly nearby. What happened here? Officer Martinez asked, looking between them. She attacked me, Trent shouted, finally getting to his feet. This psycho just attacked me for no reason. Before Kia could respond, voices erupted from the crowd. That's not true. He grabbed her first. I saw it. I got it on video. Daisy pushed through the crowd, her phone held high. I recorded the whole thing. He assaulted her. She just defended herself. More phones appeared, more videos, all showing the same thing. Trent grabbing Kia, lifting her by her collar, threatening her, and then her swift, efficient response. Officer Martinez looked at the evidence, then at Trent. Looks like you've got some explaining to do, young man. But my father, Trent started. Your father doesn't run this school, Dr. Collins said, appearing with more security. She looked shaken but determined. I've had enough, Mr. Garrison. You're coming with me. We're calling your parents and the police. This is assault, and there will be consequences. As security escorted Trent away, still protesting, still threatening lawsuits and retribution, Kia felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Mrs. Reynolds, her English teacher. Are you okay? The teacher asked softly. Kia nodded. I'm fine. Better, actually. Mrs. Reynolds smiled sadly. I'm sorry. I should have done something sooner. We all should have. The rest of the day was a blur. Kia was called to the office to give her statement. Her mother was called, and arrived within an hour, still in her scrubs from the hospital. When she heard what happened, she pulled Kia into a fierce hug. I'm proud of you, baby. So proud. But also terrified. Are you sure you're okay? Videos of the incident spread beyond the school within hours. By evening, local news had picked up the story. Parents were calling the school, demanding answers about how harassment had been allowed to escalate to physical assault. The school board called an emergency meeting. Trent's father, the mighty Ronald Garrison, arrived at school in his Mercedes, but for once, his money and influence couldn't make the problem disappear. Too many witnesses, too much evidence, too much public attention. Trent was suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Criminal charges were being considered. But Kia knew this was far from over. Trent had friends, family, a whole system that had protected him for years. They wouldn't give up easily. The next morning, Kia arrived at school to find the parking lot full of news vans. Someone had leaked the photos that had been put in her locker, and the story had exploded overnight. Racial harassment, physical assault, administrative negligence. It was all coming out. She kept her head down and hurried inside. Not interested in being anyone's symbol or spokesperson, she just wanted to go to class in peace. But peace wasn't coming yet. As she walked the hallways, the atmosphere was different. Some students nodded at her with respect. Others glared with resentment. The school was divided, and Kia was at the center of it all. In her first period English class, someone had written hero on her desk. In second period math, someone else had written a racial slur on her calculator. The battle lines were being drawn. Daisy found her at lunch, practically vibrating with nervous energy. You're famous. Everyone's talking about you. That video has like 1 million views already. Kia pushed food around her tray, her appetite gone. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to be left alone. But that's the thing, Daisy said, her voice serious now. They never leave us alone. My family's been here for 20 years, and people still ask where we're really from. At least you fought back. At least you showed them we won't just take it anymore. Before Kia could respond, Miles appeared at their table. Both girls tensed, but his hands were up in a gesture of peace. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. What Trent did, what we all did, it was wrong. Kia studied his face, looking for deception. Why now? Why apologize after I embarrassed your friend? Miles shifted uncomfortably. Because it took seeing him on that floor to realize he's not my friend. Real friends don't make you do terrible things to other people. I should have said something weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't. He walked away before either girl could respond, leaving them in stunned silence. The rest of the week brought more surprises. 3 other students came forward with stories of Trent's bullying. Emboldened by Kia's stand, the investigation revealed a pattern of harassment going back years, always covered up, always excused. Dr. Collins announced her resignation, admitting she had failed in her duty to protect all students equally. Trent's father tried to spin the story, hiring a PR firm, threatening to sue the school and Kia's family. But the videos were clear, the evidence overwhelming. His son had assaulted a student, and that student had defended herself. No amount of money could change those facts. Friday afternoon, Kia was called to the main office. She expected another meeting about the incident, but instead found her father waiting for her. He had driven up from Austin after taking time off work. His eyes were full of pride and concern as he pulled her into a hug. "You did good, baby girl. Used your training just like I taught you. Minimum force necessary. Controlled response. I'm proud of you." They sat in the conference room, and her father's expression grew serious. "But this changes things. That boy's family has power, money. They're going to come after us any way they can. Are you prepared for that?" Kia met his eyes. Her mother's determination and her father's strength combined in her gaze. "I've been preparing my whole life, Dad. I'm not backing down now." The meeting that followed included the new interim principal, the school district's lawyer, and a representative from the NAACP who had reached out to offer support. They discussed safety measures, legal protections, and the ongoing investigation. It was overwhelming, but Kia felt something she hadn't expected: hope. People were finally listening, finally taking action. As they left the school, Kia's phone buzzed with messages. Students she'd never talked to were reaching out, sharing their own stories, thanking her for standing up. A group chat had formed called Windsor United Against Bullying. With over 200 members already, change was happening, slow and painful, but real. The weekend passed in a blur of interviews, meetings, and preparation. Kia's story had gone national, sparking conversations about racism in schools, administrative accountability, and self-defense rights. She tried to stay focused on what mattered: her education, her family, her own well-being. The noise around her was just that. Noise. Monday morning arrived with new challenges. Protesters stood outside the school, some supporting Kia, others defending Trent and claiming reverse racism. Police officers were stationed at the entrances. The media circus continued. But Kia walked through it all with her head high, her parents on either side of her. Inside, the school felt different. Banners reading "Respect for All" and "Zero Tolerance for Hate" hung in the hallways. Teachers wore buttons supporting diversity and inclusion. It felt performative, like the administration was trying too hard to compensate for years of negligence. But at least they were trying. In English class, Mrs. Reynolds had rearranged the seating. Kia's desk was now in the middle of the room, surrounded by students who smiled when she entered. Trent's corner sat empty, his friends scattered to different seats. The power dynamic had shifted completely. "We're starting a new unit today," Mrs. Reynolds announced. "Voices of Resistance in Literature. We'll be reading works by authors who stood up against injustice, who refused to be silenced." She caught Kia's eye and smiled. "I think we can all learn something from their examples." Well, as the weeks passed, the immediate crisis faded, but the changes remained. Trent was expelled and charged with assault. His family moved away, their reputation in tatters. Several administrators were replaced. New policies were implemented. Training on diversity and anti-bullying became mandatory for all staff and students. Kia found herself reluctantly becoming a leader in the school's transformation. She joined the newly formed Diversity Committee, spoke at assemblies about standing up to bullying, and mentored younger students facing harassment. She hadn't asked for any of it, but she understood the responsibility that came with her actions. One afternoon, She sat with Daisy in their usual lunch spot, now joined by a diverse group of students who had formed an unlikely friendship circle. Miles was there, genuinely working to make amends for his past behavior. So was Amber, a cheerleader who had quit the squad after they refused to support Kia. There was Jordan, a black student who had been hiding his identity to fit in until Kia's courage inspired him to be himself. And Marissa, a Latina girl who shared stories of her own experiences with discrimination. "You know what the funny thing is?" Kia said, looking around at her friends. "I came here just wanting to be left alone to get my education. Instead, I ended up starting a whole movement." "How what?" Daisy laughed. "That's what happens when you refuse to be invisible. You give other people permission to be seen, too." The principal search committee eventually hired Dr. Amanda Mitchell, a woman of color with a strong background in equity and inclusion. Her first act was to meet with every student who had filed a complaint about bullying or discrimination in the past 5 years. "Real change," she announced at her first assembly, "requires us to face uncomfortable truths about our past and commit to doing better. It starts with listening to those who have been silenced." Kia's story inspired other students across the district and beyond to speak up about their experiences. A coalition of parents, students, and community members formed to address systemic issues in the schools. Town halls were held. Policies were changed. It wasn't perfect, and there was still resistance from some quarters, but progress was being made. The Garrison family tried one last legal maneuver, filing a civil suit claiming excessive force and emotional damage. But when the case went to court, the judge watched the cafeteria video and threw it out immediately. "Self-defense is not excessive force," she stated firmly, and Mr. Garrison might consider himself fortunate that criminal charges were reduced to a misdemeanor. As the school year progressed, Kia found herself thriving in ways she hadn't expected. Her grades were excellent. She made the debate team, where her quick thinking and calm under pressure served her well, and she even started teaching basic self-defense classes for other students. After school, her father came up to help with the training, proud to see his daughter passing on not just the physical techniques, but the philosophy behind them. "Remember," Kia told her students during one session, "the goal is never to hurt someone. It's to protect yourself and get to safety. The best fight is the one you avoid. But when someone puts their hands on you, when walking away isn't an option, you have the right to defend yourself. No one has the right to make you feel unsafe in your own skin." Spring arrived with unexpected recognition. Kia was nominated for a Courage Award by a national youth organization. She was invited to speak at conferences about bullying and racial justice. Colleges reached out with scholarship offers. Impressed by her grades and her character, the girl who had just wanted to be left alone had become a symbol of resistance and resilience. But with recognition came new challenges. Not everyone was happy about the changes at Windsor High. Some parents complained about reverse discrimination. Some students resented the new policies. There were whispers that Kia had planned the whole thing for attention, that she had provoked Trent deliberately. The hate mail started arriving, some of it truly vicious. Her parents worried about her safety. But Kia had learned something important through all of this. You couldn't control what other people did, or said, or thought. You could only control your own actions, your own responses. And she chose to respond with continued grace and strength. One evening, as she sat doing homework, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, wary of harassment, but something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was familiar, but unexpected. "Kia, this is Trent. Please don't hang up." She stayed silent, waiting. "I'm calling to apologize," he continued, his voice different from the arrogant tone she remembered. "I've been in therapy, anger management, the whole thing, and I realized I was wrong about everything. The way I treated you was inexcusable. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm trying to be better." The call lasted only a few minutes. Kia accepted his apology, but made it clear that words alone didn't erase actions. Real change, she told him, takes time and consistent effort, but she appreciated that he had reached out. It took courage to admit you were wrong, and she could respect that, even if she couldn't forget what had happened. As junior year ended, Kia reflected on how much had changed since that day in the cafeteria. The school was far from perfect, but it was better. Students felt safer, speaking up about injustice. Teachers were more aware and active in addressing problems. And she had found her voice, her place, her purpose. The girl who had walked into Windsor High just wanting to blend in had become someone who stood out for all the right reasons. Not because she had flipped a bully in the cafeteria, but because she had stood up for her right to exist in peace, because she had refused to be diminished or erased, because she had shown others that they could stand up too. Senior year brought new responsibilities and opportunities. Kia was elected to student council, not because she campaigned, but because her classmates wrote her in. She continued her advocacy work but also focused on her own goals: college applications, advanced placement classes, and yes, still those morning training sessions with her father when he could visit. The self-defense classes had grown into a full program with proper funding and support from the school. Students of all backgrounds attended, learning not just physical techniques, but confidence, awareness, and the importance of community support. Some of her first students were now teaching beginners, creating a legacy that would outlast her time at Windsor. One day, while teaching a class, a freshman girl approached her nervously. "I'm being bullied," she whispered. "They say things about my hijab. Tell me to go back where I came from. I'm scared to come to school." Kia knelt down to meet her eyes, remembering her own fear and anger from a year ago. "You belong here," she said firmly, "and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Tell me everything." Working with the new administration, they addressed the situation swiftly and effectively. The bullies were disciplined. The girl received support, and another potential crisis was prevented. It was proof that the systems they had fought to change were working, that speaking up could make a difference. As graduation approached, Kia received acceptance letters from several top universities, all offering significant scholarships. She chose Hamilton University. Drawn to its history of activism and excellence, it felt right to continue her education at a place that understood the power of standing up and speaking out. The graduation ceremony was emotional for many reasons. As Kia walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the applause was thunderous. She saw her parents in the crowd, tears of pride streaming down their faces. She saw Daisy and her other friends cheering wildly. She even saw some former enemies nodding with respect. But most importantly, she saw younger students watching her with hope in their eyes, knowing that they too could stand tall in spaces that tried to make them small. In her graduation speech as salutatorian, Kia spoke about transformation. "When I arrived at Windsor High," she said, "I thought strength meant keeping quiet and avoiding trouble. I learned that real strength is standing up for yourself and others, even when your voice shakes. Real strength is refusing to let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in spaces you have every right to occupy." She continued, looking out at the sea of faces. "To those who supported me, thank you. To those who stood against me, thank you too. You taught me that justice isn't given freely. It must be demanded, defended, and sometimes fought for. But always remember, violence is the last resort. The first resort is courage. The courage to say no, the courage to document injustice, the courage to demand better from our institutions and ourselves." The applause that followed seemed to go on forever. As Kia left the stage, diploma in hand, she felt the weight of the journey she had traveled. From the scared but defiant girl who had been grabbed by her collar in a cafeteria, to the confident young woman heading to university, ready to continue fighting for justice in new arenas. That summer, before leaving for college, Kia received an unexpected package. Inside was a book titled Courage in the Cafeteria. The Kia Walker story, written by a journalist who had followed her case. The dedication read, "To all the students who refused to be silenced, and to Kia Walker, who showed us that one person standing up can inspire 1,000 others to rise." She smiled, thinking of that moment when Trent's hand had grabbed her collar. When time had slowed down and she had made a choice, not just to defend herself physically, but to defend her right to exist, to learn, to thrive. It had been the hardest and best decision of her life. As she packed for college, Kia included her training gear, her notebooks full of documentation, and the lessons she had learned. She was ready for whatever came next, knowing that she had the skills, the support, and most importantly, the unshakable belief that she belonged anywhere she chose to be. The girl who had shocked everyone in that cafeteria had become a young woman who continued to surprise, inspire, and lead. And this was just the beginning. Hamilton University, activism, law school perhaps. There were so many ways to continue the fight for justice and equality. Kia Walker was ready for all of them. Looking back one last time at Windsor High as her family drove away, Kia didn't see the place where she had been bullied and assaulted. She saw the place where she had found her power, where she had learned that sometimes shocking people was exactly what was needed to wake them up, where she had discovered that one person refusing to be pushed down could lift up countless others. The collar grab that had started everything seemed like a lifetime ago, but the strength she had shown in that moment, the decisive action that had shocked everyone, would stay with her forever. It was proof that no one had the right to put their hands on her, to tell her she didn't belong, to try to make her small. She was Kia Walker, and she would never let anyone grab her collar again without facing the consequences. As they drove toward her future, Kia smiled, knowing that somewhere in Windsor High, in schools across the country, other students were finding their courage, standing their ground, and shocking everyone who thought they could be pushed around. Her story had become their story, and their stories would create the change that was so desperately needed. The shock in that cafeteria had sent ripples far beyond what anyone could have imagined, and those ripples were still spreading, still inspiring, still changing the world, one brave stand at a time. The first few months at Hamilton University tested Kia in ways she hadn't anticipated. Here, she wasn't the only black student fighting for recognition. She was surrounded by excellence, by students who had their own stories of resistance and triumph. It was both humbling and empowering. In her African American Studies class, when Professor Dawson asked students to share experiences that shaped their activism, Kia found herself hesitating for the first time in months. The girl next to her, Zoe from Detroit, had organized walkouts at her school over inadequate heating in winter. The guy across from her, Malcolm from Chicago, had started a non-profit to combat food deserts in his neighborhood. Everyone had fought battles. Everyone had scars. Everyone had victories. When it was her turn, Kia simply said she had stood up to a bully, leaving out the viral video and national attention. She wanted to be known for more than that one moment, even if it had defined so much of her recent life. Back at Windsor High, her absence was felt more than anyone had expected. The self-defense program continued under new student leadership, but enrollment dropped. The diversity committee still met, but with less urgency, less fire. It was as if the school was holding its breath, waiting for the next catalyst, the next person brave enough to shake things up. That person turned out to be Avery Thompson, a sophomore who had watched Kia stand from the crowd that day in the cafeteria. Avery was quiet, artistic, wore her natural hair in beautiful patterns her grandmother had taught her, and had been dealing with microaggressions since middle school. Teachers touching her hair without permission, students making jokes about her dark skin, the usual cruelties that schools pretended didn't exist. The incident that sparked everything happened in October. Avery was in art class working on a self-portrait that celebrated her Sudanese heritage when Brett Morrison, a junior who thought he was funny, started making clicking sounds and jokes about African tribes. The teacher, Miss Brooks, was new, young, afraid to rock the boat. She pretended not to hear, focusing intently on helping another student. Avery remembered watching Kia that day in the cafeteria. The calm before the storm, the decisive action when touched, the refusal to be minimized. She put down her paintbrush and stood up. "Brett," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "You need to stop, right now." Brett looked around for support from his friends. "Or what? You gonna call your warrior princess?" She graduated. "Remember, nobody's here to save you." "That's where you're wrong," Avery said, pulling out her phone. "I'm here to save myself, and I'm recording everything you just said." The class went silent. Miss Brooks finally looked up, realizing she couldn't pretend anymore. Brett's face changed from amused to worried. "You can't record me without permission," he blustered. "Actually, I can," Avery replied. "It's a one-party consent state, and you're harassing me in a public classroom. I know my rights. Kia Walker made sure we all learned them." The video went to Dr. Martinez within an hour. Brett was suspended by the end of the day. But more importantly, Avery's stand reminded everyone that Kia's legacy wasn't just about one incident. It was about empowering others to stand up for themselves, to document injustice, to demand better. The spirit she had awakened was still alive at Windsor High. Meanwhile, at Hamilton, Kia was discovering new dimensions to her activism. She joined the campus chapter of Black Lives Matter, participated in protests against police brutality, and began training with the university's martial arts club. But she also found joy in things that had nothing to do with fighting or resistance. She joined the poetry club, discovering she had a gift for spoken word. She dated a philosophy major named Jordan, who challenged her intellectually and made her laugh. She was becoming more than just the girl who flipped a bully. One evening in November, her phone rang with a familiar number. It was Daisy. Her voice was excited and nervous. "Kia, you need to know what's happening here. Remember Brett Morrison? He's trying to sue Avery for recording him without consent. His family hired Trent's old lawyer. They're trying to make an example of her." Kia felt the familiar fire ignite in her chest. "Some people never learn. Give me Avery's number," she said, "and tell her not to worry. We've been through this before." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of phone calls, video conferences, and legal consultations. Kia connected Avery with the same NAACP lawyer who had helped her case. She coached her through the emotional toll of being targeted, shared strategies for documentation and self-care. Most importantly, she reminded her that she wasn't alone. The network of support that had formed around Kia's case was still there, still ready to activate. The lawsuit fell apart quickly once the lawyer reviewed the evidence. Brett's harassment was clear, the recording was legal, and the school's failure to intervene initially was another mark against them. But the real victory came when Avery organized a school-wide assembly on cultural respect and appreciation. She brought in speakers from different backgrounds, showcased art and music from various cultures, and turned what could have been just another discipline issue into a learning opportunity. Kia watched the live stream from her dorm room at Hamilton, pride swelling in her chest. This was what real change looked like. Not just one person standing up once, but creating a culture where standing up became normal, expected, supported, where students knew their rights and weren't afraid to use them, where teachers couldn't hide behind ignorance or fear. As winter break approached, Kia received an invitation that surprised her. Windsor High wanted her to be the keynote speaker at their MLK Day assembly. The request came from Dr. Martinez personally, who wrote, "Your impact here continues to ripple outward. Our students need to see what you've become to understand that standing up to injustice is not just a moment but a lifetime commitment." Kia accepted, though returning to Windsor filled her with mixed emotions. So much had happened in those hallways, both terrible and transformative. As she prepared her speech, She thought about what message she wanted to leave with current students. It couldn't just be about fighting back. It had to be about building forward. The day she returned to Windsor High, the parking lot was fuller than usual. Word had spread that Kia Walker was coming back, and parents, community members, and students from other schools had come to hear her speak. As she walked through the front doors, she was struck by how small everything seemed. The hallways that had once felt like gauntlets now just looked like hallways. The cafeteria, where everything had changed, was just a room with tables and the smell of reheated pizza. But the faces that greeted her were different. Students she'd never met approached her with reverence, telling her how her story had inspired them. Teachers who had once been silent bystanders now wore buttons promoting inclusivity and had difficult conversations in their classrooms. The display case that once held only sports trophies now included photos from diversity events and quotes about justice and equality. In Dr. Martinez's office before the assembly, the principal showed her statistics that made Kia's eyes water. Bullying reports were down 60%, not because less was happening, but because students felt safe reporting it. The self-defense program had trained over 200 students. The diversity committee had successfully advocated for curriculum changes that included more voices of color in literature and history classes. Windsor High wasn't perfect, but it was transforming. When Kia walked onto the auditorium stage, the standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. She saw familiar faces in the crowd, Daisy beaming with pride, Miles, who had genuinely changed and was now co-leading anti-bullying workshops, and surprisingly, Avery Thompson, who had become the new face of student activism. But she also saw hundreds of faces she didn't recognize, students who knew her only as a legend, a story, a possibility. She began her speech not with the cafeteria incident, but with a quote from James Baldwin. "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." She talked about the difference between individual acts of courage and systemic change. About how flipping a bully might make you famous for a minute, but flipping the script on bullying culture took sustained effort from everyone. "I didn't come to Windsor High intending to be an activist," she told them. "I came wanting to learn, to grow, to prepare for my future. But I learned that sometimes your future depends on your willingness to fight for your present. That safety isn't given but taken, that respect isn't granted but demanded, and most importantly, that one person standing up can inspire others. But real change happens when we stand together." She shared stories from Hamilton, from the protest movements she joined, and from the poetry that helped her process trauma and transform it into art. She talked about the burden and blessing of being seen as a symbol, and how she learned to balance fighting for others with caring for herself. She emphasized that activism wasn't just about confrontation, but about creation, of building new systems while tearing down old ones. During the question period, a freshman raised her hand shakily. "What if we're not brave like you? What if we're scared?" Kia's response would be quoted in the school newspaper and remembered for years. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of fear." I was terrified that day in the cafeteria. My hands were shaking even as I flipped Trent. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I let him continue, if I let him think he had the right to put his hands on me. Start small. Document what you see. Support others who speak up. Bravery is a muscle that grows with use. After the assembly, Kia stayed for hours talking with students, taking photos, signing copies of the book that had been written about her. But the most meaningful moment came when a young teacher approached her. Miss Kane was maybe 25, fresh out of education school, and she had tears in her eyes. "I taught here during your senior year," she said. "Watching you changed how I understood my role as an educator. I promised myself I would never be a bystander. Never let harassment happen in my classroom. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like." As Kia prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez walked her to her car. "You know," the principal said, We've had inquiries from other schools, other districts, asking how we transformed our culture. We tell them it started with one student refusing to be grabbed, refusing to be silenced. But it continued with hundreds of students finding their own ways to resist, their own voices to raise. You didn't just change a moment, Kia. You changed a mindset. Driving away from Windsor High for the second time, Kia felt a sense of completion she hadn't expected. The girl who had entered that school just wanting to be left alone had become a catalyst for transformation. But more than that, she had shown others how to be catalysts themselves. The ripples from that moment in the cafeteria continued to spread, creating waves of change that would crash against shores she'd never see. Back at Hamilton, spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. Kia declared a double major in criminal justice and African American studies. With plans for law school, she wanted to be the lawyer who stood beside the next generation of students fighting for their rights. She began internships with civil rights organizations, learning how to challenge systems through litigation and legislation, not just individual confrontation. But the universe wasn't done testing her yet. In March, a video went viral from a high school in Tennessee. A young Latina student had been cornered by 3 male students, threatened for speaking Spanish in the hallway. Unlike Kia's situation, this girl had no martial arts training. She was simply terrified, crying, begging them to leave her alone. The video was heartbreaking. But what happened next shocked everyone. A black male student stepped between them, calmly but firmly telling the bullies to back off. When one swung at him, he used a move that looked remarkably familiar, a wrist lock and sweep that put the attacker on the ground without serious injury. In the interview that followed, the student, Derek Williams, said he learned the technique from videos of Kia Walker. She showed me that you don't have to accept being targeted, and you don't have to become the aggressor to defend yourself or others. I've watched her videos 100 times, studied how she stayed calm, how she used minimum force. She saved that girl because she first saved herself, and showed us how. Kia cried when she saw the video, understanding fully for the first time the true reach of her impact. It wasn't just about Windsor High anymore. Students across the country were learning from her example, adapting her methods, finding their own courage. The self-defense wasn't just physical, but psychological, emotional, spiritual. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. That summer, she was invited to speak at a national education conference about school safety and anti-bullying initiatives. Standing before hundreds of educators, administrators, and policymakers, Kia Walker was no longer just the girl from the cafeteria video. She was a voice for change, a bridge between student experiences and institutional responses. She challenged them to move beyond zero-tolerance policies that often punished victims along with aggressors, to create environments where standing up to bullying was supported, not suppressed. We tell students to speak up, to tell an adult, to trust the system, she said, her voice strong and clear. But then we fail them when they do. We ignore the whispers until they become shouts. We dismiss the small aggressions until they become assaults. We prioritize comfort over justice, quiet over equity, and then we wonder why students feel they have no choice but to fight back. The solution isn't to punish those who defend themselves. It's to create schools where defense isn't necessary. The speech received a standing ovation. But more importantly, it sparked policy discussions that would eventually lead to real changes in how schools addressed bullying and harassment. Kia's story had become a case study, her methods a model, her message a movement. From one moment of refusing to be grabbed, an entire philosophy of resistance and resilience had emerged. The sun was low over Washington, D.C., painting the marble buildings with a golden haze. Kia Walker walked across the campus of Hamilton University, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her steps steady, purposeful. She had just finished her last final exam of the semester. For the first time in weeks, her mind wasn't filled with case law, essay prompts, or debate arguments. Instead, it was drifting back to the place where everything had begun. Windsor High, the cafeteria, the hand on her collar. Even now, years later, the memory was sharp as glass. But it no longer stabbed her with anger or fear. It rested inside her like a scar that had healed strong. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daisy. Big news. Windsor High wants you back for the 10-year commemoration of the Diversity Initiative. They're naming the new community center after you. Kia stopped walking. Around her, students hurried by, arms full of books, voices raised in chatter about finals and summer plans. She barely heard them. Her name on a building? At the school where she had once been told she didn't belong? She sat down on the low stone wall that bordered the campus lawn and let the weight of it sink in. 10 years, a lifetime and a heartbeat. When she returned to Windsor, the town looked smaller than she remembered. The streets she had once rushed down with her head bowed now seemed almost quaint, lined with bakeries and corner stores trying to survive the march of chain businesses. But the school, that was different. The parking lot where she had once faced reporters and protesters was quiet now. Inside, the hallways were brighter, filled with student art, posters about inclusion, and photographs from events that hadn't existed when she was a student. The air buzzed with the sound of kids who weren't afraid to be seen. Dr. Martinez, still principal, greeted her with a hug. "You'll want to see this before the ceremony," she said, leading Kia toward the new community wing. On the wall outside the double doors was a plaque, covered in velvet cloth. When it was pulled back later that evening, it would read, "The Kia Walker Center for Justice and Belonging." Kia's throat tightened. "You didn't have to." "Yes, we did." Dr. Martinez interrupted gently. "You showed us what courage looks like. This isn't about honoring one student. It's about reminding every student who walks through these halls that their voice matters, that they matter." The auditorium was packed. Parents, alumni, city officials, and rows of students filled the seats. The noise quieted as Kia stepped on stage. For a moment, she just looked out at them, at the faces, some eager, some skeptical, all waiting. She remembered the freshman girl who once asked her, "What if we're not brave?" She remembered her own voice trembling in that cafeteria, her knees shaking even as she stood her ground. "I once thought my story started with a fight in this cafeteria," she began, her voice steady. "But I've learned that my story started long before that, with my parents teaching me to stand tall, with every quiet act of resilience I saw in others. And it didn't end when I walked out of here. It grew, because courage isn't a single act. It's a seed you plant, and it grows when others water it." And she spoke about Avery's stand in art class, about Derek in Tennessee, about students she had never met who had written to her over the years, telling her how her story gave them the courage to speak, to fight, to believe. "You don't have to be me," she told them. "You don't have to flip a bully in front of 300 people. You just have to refuse to let fear decide who you are. Courage is contagious, and every time you stand up, you give someone else permission to do the same." How? The applause rose, but Kia held up her hand. "And remember this, change is never finished. It's work. It's ongoing. It's yours now." After the ceremony, as people crowded around her for photos and signatures, Kia slipped away to the cafeteria. The tables were new, the paint fresher, but the room smelled the same. Pizza, detergent, a faint tang of nervous energy. She stood in the spot where Trent had grabbed her collar, where the world had seemed to stop. For a long time, she just stood there, listening to the echo of her own breathing. Then she smiled. The room no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a place reclaimed. That night, back at her parents' house, Kia sat on the porch with her father. He was older now, his hair grayer, but his eyes sharp as ever. "You did good today," he said. Kia leaned against him. "It doesn't feel like it's mine anymore. It feels bigger, That's the point, he replied. What you started was never just about you. It was about all of them, about everyone who comes after. The night air was warm, carrying the sound of crickets. For the first time in years, Kia felt at peace. Months later, she stood again on a stage, this time in New York, at a national summit on civil rights. She was introduced not just as an activist, but as a future attorney, a leader. The crowd cheered, but Kia barely heard them. She thought of the freshman girl with the hijab, of Avery, of Derek, of the countless others who had taken courage into their own hands. When she spoke, it wasn't to tell her story anymore. It was to remind them that their stories mattered. We don't get to choose if life tests us, she said. We only get to choose how we respond. And when one person responds with courage, it ripples outward, further than we can imagine. Late one evening, back at Hamilton, Kia walked across the quiet campus. She passed a group of students practicing martial arts on the lawn. A girl executed a wrist lock and sweep clumsily, then laughed as her friends clapped. Kia stopped, watching. For a moment, she saw herself awkward, young, trying to remember her father's lessons. She saw how far she had come, and how much further others could go. One of the students noticed her. "Professor Walker," he called jokingly, "you're the reason we started this club." She laughed, shook her head, and waved. But as she walked away, a tear slipped down her cheek. It was never just about one fight. It was about every fight after, carried on by others. And as long as those ripples kept spreading, Kia knew she had done enough. The cafeteria fight at Windsor High was never just about a collar grab. It was never just about a girl refusing to be bullied. It was about what happens when silence is broken, when one person decides that fear will not dictate the terms of their existence. Kia Walker's story reminds us that injustice rarely begins with fists. It starts in whispers, in rolled eyes, in jokes that cut like blades but leave no visible scars. It grows in silence, when bystanders look away, when authority shrugs, when comfort is chosen over courage, and unless someone interrupts it, it festers until it explodes. Kia interrupted it, not because she wanted to be a hero, but because she knew that dignity is not negotiable. In standing her ground, she proved a truth that should echo in every hallway, every classroom, every community. No one has the right to make another person feel small. The lesson isn't that you must be a fighter to resist injustice. It isn't about strength of muscle. It's about strength of choice. Kia documented every slight, every note slipped into her locker, every sneer thrown across a classroom. She chose not to hide them, but to face them. That's resistance. That's courage. And here's the part we can't forget. Courage is contagious. Avery's stand in art class, Derek's defense in Tennessee, the freshman who dared to ask, "What if we're scared?" They were all ripples of Kia's decision to say no in that cafeteria. One act of defiance became a movement because it gave others permission to believe they mattered too. So what do we take from this? That the world will not always hand you justice neatly wrapped. Sometimes it will hand you silence. Sometimes it will hand you cruelty. But your voice, your action, can disrupt that silence. Start small. Report the things you see. Stand beside someone who feels alone. Offer your words when theirs have been stolen. Remember, bravery is not about erasing fear. It's about choosing action in the middle of it. And when enough of us make that choice, culture shifts. Schools change. Communities heal. Kia's story is not only hers anymore. It belongs to everyone who refuses to be erased. It belongs to every student who whispers, "Me too," in crowded hallways. It belongs to you if you are willing to carry it forward. And that is why we tell these stories not to freeze them as headlines, but to release them as sparks. Because each spark, passed from hand to hand, can light a fire bright enough to banish shadows. So let's not keep this story to ourselves. Let it live in conversation. Let it live in the comment you leave, in the reflection you share, in the decision to subscribe and return for more stories that demand to be heard. That's what we do here at Raw Black Stories. We honor the truth, however raw, however heavy, and we let it teach us how to build better. Kia once walked into Windsor High, wanting only to be left alone. She left having shown the world what it means to stand tall. Her story whispers a challenge to all of us. What will you do when it's your turn to stand? The answer, as always, is still being written by you.